excited to be here.
I am super excited to have you here. And I have a ton of questions. So I think if it's okay with you, I'm going to jump right in to the tennis area of your life. Do you remember the tennis area of your life?
Oh, yes, I do. Not forgettable.
Not forgettable. So you are a tennis player, but back in the day, you were an exceptional tennis player. You were nationally ranked. Okay, she's giving me the menza. I'm doing this from Italy, so I'm used to hand signals. This is what we have here.
I was a good tennis player. Exceptional is probably an overstatement.
All right, so we'll go
very serious. Let's go very serious.
Perfect. But your coach said something to you when you were a teenager that perhaps is a bit counterintuitive, and that was, hey, look, why don't you spend 75% of your time honing your greatest strength and develop it into an extraordinary asset, and devote 25% of the time on the other parts of the game. In what ways did that influence how you think about work now, or think about the work that you do now?
I think it might have been the most important piece of advice I've ever gotten, because at that stage, tennis was my life, right? And I was really focused on patching my weaknesses. That was how I was thinking about what practice was for. I have these gaping holes, these limitations. I need to focus so hard on patching those. That is why I go out and practice every day. And this completely reset the way I was thinking about the sport to actually the way you become great at something is that you hone your strengths. Yep. And I realized quickly that actually applied to everything in life. As soon as you get choice, right? When you're sort of a high school student, like you have to take some math and some English and some history, right? But as soon as you go out into the world and start on a path where you have options and opportunities and you're choosing between them, it becomes so important to recognize that you want to lean into your strengths as opposed to obsessing about your weaknesses. I mean, I do think it's important to say you can't just ignore your weaknesses. You need to be aware of them. You don't want to leave them, and make them get fester and get to be terrible. And there are some that you can't ignore, but it's changed the way I advise my students. It's changed the way I choose my projects, my efforts. I like science communication and I'm decent at it. So I lean into that. And I'm, maybe not the world's most extraordinary econometrician. And so I find other extraordinary econometricians to partner with me when I do big statistical projects, right? So like finding other people who can plug holes and then leaning into what you're great at, for me, has been so impactful in terms of my enjoyment of my work. And I think the quality of what I'm doing. And I try to coach other people in the same way to think more about what are you great at and how can you hone that strength, lean into it as much as possible so you can truly make a huge impact.
Well, I couldn't be an econometrician because I don't know what it is. It must be something
it's a fancy word for statistician in the economics profession.
It must be have something to do with the fact that you got into Princeton, maybe Harvard too. And I didn't. So we're just going to leave that one on the table. Who the hell needs to know?
I mean, I chose an esoteric term to highlight, we can't all be great at everything. It's something I'm not great at. Right. And so anyway, and you don't have to be great at everything. It's great to figure out what you're not terrific at.
Okay. So here's the question then. Why do you think that it is? Oh, shit. Oh my God. I just did that. Can you hear me better now?
Again? I can.
Oh my God.
I could hear fine before, but now you're much clearer.
No. We're going to leave it at, I have never in 350 episodes, I have never not had a mic under my mouth. For some reason or another, I did not have the mic, but that's Hollywood. So we're going to keep it going. Don't even worry about it.
It's on theme with humans make mistakes. One of them is that we're forgetful. And once we know that about ourselves, we can grow and get better.
Wow.
Did you do it to demonstrate that?
I wanted to make sure that everybody understood that we are all fallible. Here's the question one more time with a microphone. why do you think that we tend to want to lean into areas of weakness instead of maximizing and doubling down on what we're good at?
Oh, I love that question. There's a pretty well studied phenomenon in psychology called the spotlight effect, which
Okay.
is about the way I think about it is, when you have a pimple and you're sure everyone's staring at your pimple, but no one notices.
Mm-hmm.
That's the spotlight effect. Like there's something wrong with you. You become really focused on it because you're so upset about it, and you assume the whole world is seeing that glaring error because it bothers you so much. I think the spotlight effect might be part of why we worry so much about our weaknesses. We're aware of them. We see that we don't measure up on some dimension, and then we're sure they must be obvious to everyone else. They must all be staring at us and wondering, how did she get her addition wrong on that example she just did in class? This professor must be a moron. Whatever it is, when in reality, like life is busy. There's a lot of other inputs people are taking. They're not focused on your limits particularly, but that is a human tendency, is to experience that spotlight effect. So my guess, I haven't studied this. I'm just riffing here with you. My
Yeah.
guess is that might be part of why we worry so much about trying to patch weaknesses, is because we think others notice them more than they really do. We're insecure about that. And then we think it's a bigger problem than it is. We tend to blow it out of proportion.
I wonder if it's also that we take for granted that we're really good at something, and we innately just think that things need to be harder, and we want them to, like, we have to work for it. In other words, it's too easy. Like I'm too good at this. It's too easy for me. So I wonder, but okay.
Like the Protestant work ethic thing, like we feel like anything that doesn't come with struggle isn't worth achieving. Yeah.
Right. That's well said. Okay. So I want to fast forward a little bit. And I want to move into the Princeton years for you. You decided that you wanted to drop out of tennis. You had had enough of tennis. You needed to focus on your academics. But with anything, we have an identity that's tied to what it is that we do. And I once heard Tony Robbins say, I'm paraphrasing, but something like, one of the strongest needs in the human condition is our desire to remain consistent with our identity. In other words, whatever we tell ourselves that we are, we want to align with that at all costs. And so you were the tennis girl, right? You were the girl that played tennis. You played it well, but then you said, I'm out. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. How did that affect your identity around that? And how do you think about that in the kind of work that you do now in terms of identity with a broader brush?
Yeah, that's interesting. It was a really hard decision to quit for that reason. I wasn't particularly enjoying the experience of being a college tennis player. It took tons of hours away from other things that I liked better. And it was hurting my grades. It was reducing my opportunities to have a fun social life, to get enough sleep, all those things that matter immensely. And I wasn't like a really important part of the team. I was riding the bench for the most part. I occasionally contributed in small ways, but I was not a really important part of this organization. They were going to be just fine without me. But I think I probably played for 50% longer on the team than I needed to, just because it was so hard to imagine letting go. And by the way, I still have dreams. It's been 20 years. I still have dreams about being, later on in my career at the university and going back to the coach and joining the team again. Like, I would have them weekly for a while, and I still have them maybe once every 6 months. I dream I'm a college student again, going back to the coach and saying, I want to come back. Will you take me? So, it's really hard to break away from things like that.
Why do you think? Is it because of everything that was wrapped up in that identity?
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, this is what I study, change, right? And this is one kind of change, is just making a clean break from something. It's tough because So yeah, so much of who I was, I identified as part of this group, part of this team, as an athlete, and to just walk away from it was really difficult. I needed to figure out what will my new identity be. I was doing it for a reason. I think that helped a lot. I sort of had identified like I am getting really excited about this aspect of academics. I wanted to start doing some research, which has become my life's work. And I saw that I didn't have the time and capacity. So it was important to me to know how I was going to fill that gap and who I was going to be instead, as opposed to simply saying, well, this isn't that fun and it's crowding out other things that are. I needed a real reason, an identity relevant reason to make that switch. But it was still difficult even with that.
Okay. So you mentioned that what you do now, and I was going to ask you, well, I'll ask you anyway. If you're at a cocktail party and somebody says, what do you do for a living? What do you say?
I normally say you should ask my husband because he'll give you a much more succinct answer. Truly.
Really? Well, okay. So I'm gonna channel your husband through you now. If
you want me to actually answer that question?
If you were your husband answering the question, how would your husband describe it?
I study the way people make peculiar decisions, what it is that motivates them to make those decisions, and how to get them to do things like quit smoking and exercise more regularly, get vaccinated, save more for retirement. What are the tools that can promote those good decisions? He would have done it better though.
He would have done it. You didn't channel him so good. Okay. So here's the question. When somebody I'm going to give you my thoughts, and I want you to tell me what your thoughts about my thoughts are. I believe that when people make a change, they make a change because they hit thresholds. They say, not another minute, not another second. I put the bikini on. I saw the way it looks in the mirror. I'm done. It's over. And it starts now. And it's usually done when there is massive pain. Am I right?
I think you are right that there has to be some precipitating event, and a threshold is one way of thinking about that, right? Like I couldn't fit into my old jeans, or I had an awful experience with my boss. I have a good friend who was just telling me the story of she was a working mom during the pandemic. She told me the story of the day she quit her job, decided she was just going to be a mom. And she said what happened was her oldest kid came into the room while she was on her computer, and the kids were supposed to be out doing Zoom school on their own, and handed her a small brown object and said, here's some poop. And she said, what? And anyway, there's a conversation that went on. She learned it was one of the younger children's poop, that there had been an encounter, and the older one had thought it was reasonable to bring it to mom. And she decided then and there, this is too outrageous. I have to quit. I do think a lot of us have those precipitating moments. It's like it washes over us. One of the things I've actually studied when it comes to those kinds of moments is moments in time that cause us to feel like we're crossing a threshold, which I think is different than an event like your child handing you poop and you realizing your parenting isn't where you want it to be. But what my collaborators and I have studied is that at moments like the start of a new year, which we're all familiar with, the celebration of a birthday, even something smaller like the start of a new week or a new month or a new season, if it's called to our attention, we feel like we have a bit of a blank slate and a fresh start, and we're turning the page on a chapter in our lives. So there are moments that have that sense of a new beginning, and those are thresholds, and people are more likely to begin pursuing new goals at those moments. And I think it's partly related to what you're saying. There's like an introspection that happens because you're crossing over a threshold. There's also an identity shift. You can say like, oh, the old me last year didn't do this, but the new me can. So you can have more optimism. You feel like, oh, I'm a distinct person. This chapter change has helped with that, but also you just do more reflection, right? I'm coming up on my 40th birthday, and that just leads you to think like, oh, wow, I'm getting halfway there. What have I accomplished? What are the things that I wish were different? So I think that's another kind of threshold that evidence points to. So I think I'm agreeing with you, even though the evidence I have is limited to those kinds of, I'll call them temporal thresholds.
So the birthdays that end in the 0, the new year that starts at, day 1, those moments have an impact. We all know everybody does, New Year's resolutions, and I almost can't even look at social media during those 2 weeks that lead up to it and the first week after, because it's such bullshit about what they're going to do, because 3 weeks later, the Haagen-Dazs, they're still eating it, right? So why does that optimism, look, I'm making generalizations, obviously, but why does that optimism get so, they're all hot and bothered, but then the lasting change is something altogether different? Like these we all know that New Year's resolutions, for the most part, they don't stick. Why is that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the basic answer is change does not require a moment where you decide I'm going to change. Change requires effort over time, repeated effort. It requires finding a way to do this and that's sustainable. And so those moments where we say I'm fed up, most of them we can't take a single action and make a change. Occasionally we can, right? I went and quit the tennis team. My friend quit her job. Quitting is one of those things that we can do. Another thing we can do in sort of a single moment of inspiration is something like, sign up for a 401k, a retirement savings program that'll just like carry us forward. So you can sign up for things and you can quit things. And sometimes that'll make a change in your life. But a lot of the stuff that we want to do, like the most popular New Year's resolution, as you've alluded to, is dieting. That's not let me just sign up and I'm done, right? You have to change what you eat day in and day out, or exercise. You have to change how often you're actually going to the gym day in and day out. It's not a single decision point. And so that's why all of the other things I study, besides fresh start moments, which is one of my favorite topics I've ever studied, why I think they matter. And actually, when I decided to write a book, a bunch of my friends were like, oh, you're going to write a book about fresh starts, right? Because that's sort of your thing and you've studied that extensively and it seems like people really relate to that. And I was like, that would be a really crummy book because it wouldn't really help people that much. There's a couple things you can do with that fresh start momentum, but mostly you need a lot of other tools once you've had that revelation, right? So it's great to have the revelation, and I'm all for fresh starts pushing people to begin, but you need so many other tools and so many other strategies to overcome the barriers to change. For the most part, it's not just a one and done.
Okay, so if we're equipping somebody with the toolbox and we're saying, all right, look, it's New Year, it's New Year's Eve. I'm with you. You get a fresh start. That this you're starting off great. Like you're going down the right road. You're
Yeah.
ready to leap. Your psychology, you have the best of intentions. But then, 2 weeks goes by. What tools should they have? And it doesn't have to be New Year's. It could be change, any kind of change. What tools maybe you can give me one or two. What are one or two tools that somebody can have in their toolbox when they've decided I'm going to make a change?
Yeah.
What would you add to it?
Okay. I'm going to give you tools, but I have to give you a caveat first, which is probably the most important thing I have found studying this is too often people just want tools and they don't diagnose what's specifically likely to hold them back given their goal. And the answer is like the best tool depends on what the barriers are likely to be for you. Now, there's some really common barriers that are almost like, we can almost guarantee they'll get in your way, but they're not always there. And I do think that diagnosis phase, it's too often neglected, right? Like you're not taking your medications. Is it because you're forgetting or you hate the side effects? We do really different things to solve the problem, depending, right? And so anyway, so the diagnosis is important. And yet I want to answer your question. I'm going to give you one of my favorite tools, which I really think applies to almost all of the change troubles we have. And that is that most of the time when we start thinking about our New Year's resolution or our plan to change, that's going to require day in, day out effort, we're looking for a path, maybe we're looking for a path that's going to be really efficient. So let me give you the example of exercise. You want to get fit. You're like, I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to find the most efficient exercise I can do to get in shape. Like, let's go for the maximally punishing Stairmaster. It turns out that is not as good of a strategy as instead looking for a fun way to get fit. So Most people don't think at all about the experience they're going to have during their fitness routine. They're like, get me to the Stairmaster, get me to my goal as fast as possible. A
Yeah.
small subset of people think, I want to have a really good time while I'm trying to get fit. Let me try to take a Zumba class with my friend. You're going to burn less calories per minute, but you're going to enjoy it. And it turns out you're going to persist longer if you find a way to pursue your goals that's actually instantly gratifying in the moment. Most people think, if I have the big goal, I just have to do it. I just focus, like effort. I can do this. We already talked about the Protestant work ethic, and that is wrong. So research by Ayelet Fishbach at the University of Chicago and Caitlin Woolley at Cornell University has nicely demonstrated this misconception that people think effective is more important than fun, but that if you actually prompt people, get them to try the fun path, they stick to it longer, whether it's exercise, diet, study habits. That instant experience is so much more important than we realize. We overweight whether we're enjoying it now and tend to underweight the importance of our long-term goals. And that's a big barrier to change in many contexts. So more focus on how are you going to make it actually fun, actually gratifying in the moment to pursue this goal so that you won't find it unpleasant in the first couple attempts and have quit a week in.
Well, it's really interesting because I probably, I don't know, in the last 30 years, I would say there's not been a week that's gone by, maybe one or two, where I haven't worked out. And so people ask me, like, what is it? And so it's always difficult for me to deconstruct, like, why is it that motivation isn't a thing for me? But as you're speaking, I'm realizing that there are certain things that I do that I put different things together. So for example, when I'm stretching before I work out, there is a YouTube series rotation that I go through, where different YouTubers that are giving me different information that I listen to, that I enjoy. When I'm doing wind sprints on the treadmill, I'm listening to certain playlists that remind me of like high school, like, sort of like Nirvana, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just like, I'm back.
We went to high school the same time.
You know what I mean? Like I'm back,
Yes.
I'm back in, when I'm lifting weights, it's a little bit more. So on the way to the gym, since we moved here to Italy, when I walk to the gym, I listen to Italian verbs because I'm learning Italian, and I don't feel weird because I got earbuds in my ears and I'm talking out loud saying the verbs. So there's a scoring process that I do that I look forward to that is completely separate from the actual exercise, but it's my time to do those things. And even something silly like the laundry. Like I enjoy listening to podcasts when I'm folding laundry. You know what I mean? So
you're naturally doing something I call temptation bundling, which is one way to make things fun. So you can make things fun by choosing different activities, right? Like you can be like, I do yoga class, or I do Zumba, or, I eat these healthy foods because I love them. So you can choose how you do it. Or you can actually combine something that otherwise would feel like a chore with something that's a pleasure, and that changes the experience. And that's temptation bundling. It's something that I do and have studied. It's like, only letting yourself binge watch your favorite TV show at the gym is a temptation bundle, or pick up your favorite treat on the way to the library to hit the books. That's a temptation bundle. And it sounds like with your playlists and your verbs and your, and your podcasts while folding laundry, you are temptation bundling, and that's a way to make it more fun to pursue your goals. You link them with something enjoyable, even if they themselves are being pursued through the same path that feels a little bit less fun.
That's right. There is a gentleman, I can't remember his name right now. I think you'll know it, who wrote a book on habits. And one of the things he talked about in the book is about having an alter ego. And like if you're in the gym, it's your Superman moments. If you are in business, there may be some titan of industry that you think about. Have you ever done any research or come across anything like that where, you sort of like, and he goes as far as to say, like, if you really need it, put some, if you're going for the Clark Kent thing, put some glasses on to really to really lock it in for change. Like he's all in on this.
That's
Do
interesting.
you know
So
anything?
I'm not sure who that is. There's a lot of popular books about habit by journalists, some who base their work in research, some who don't. I don't know of any research that supports that particular strategy, but that doesn't mean it isn't something worth trying. If it works for you, who cares if there's research behind it?
Yeah,
but
right.
I don't know of evidence that says that's going to work consistently.
Okay. I want to talk about COVID. We have a situation right now, as you well know, where people are having issues wearing their mask. What would you do to get people to wear their mask and or get vaccinated?
Yeah. Spent a lot of time thinking about this over. Oh my God. I've had a lot of conversations like this over the last year and a half. And I have to say, I think I can be more helpful with vaccination than with mask wearing, though I'll do my best on both.
Okay.
Vaccination, I sort of threw my whole research team a curveball. We pivoted in March of 2020 from studying some other topics to say we're going to put all of our time and energy into developing the most effective messaging around encouraging vaccination. So we sort of saw coming down the pipe the minute that this whole pandemic started. Since we'd studied vaccination before, we knew not everybody does it, even when there's a safe and effective vaccine, and that communication can matter a lot in terms of take up. So we actually ran experiments with Walmart pharmacies and Penn Medicine and Geisinger Health, a couple large regional health systems, in the fall of 2020, before there was a vaccine available. We tested dozens of ideas submitted by team scientists who I work with. I have a team of about 150 behavioral scientists all around the world with different backgrounds. We said, send us your best ideas on messaging that would be effective for nudging COVID-19 vaccinations when they're available. And we're going to test it with flu vaccines to see if it has potential. So the message needs to be basically work in either setting. We tested dozens of different ideas, ranging from texting people and encouraging them to go to the pharmacy to get a vaccine and telling them, look, numbers are up, people are getting vaccinated more than ever before. Or we invited people who had a doctor's visit coming up to dedicate a shot they were about to get to a loved one. Or we told them, do this for all the people in your community you care about. So do it for others, not for yourself. We tested jokes. We thought maybe we can make this lighthearted. We'll tell you a joke about the flu. Have you heard the one about the flu? Don't spread it around. So we tested all sorts of different communication strategies. And interestingly, one rose to the top across all our tests. And that was really simply telling people we'd reserved a vaccine for them, that there was a vaccine waiting for them. And we think that ended up performing so well. And by the way, I should also say, just reminding people had a pretty big impact. But our best messages lifted vaccination by about 10%. And by the way, this was then subsequently tested by one of our collaborators on COVID-19 vaccinations in January and February. They rolled out our best basically performing type of message and saw it worked there too, about the same impact. We think it matters because it makes you feel like it belongs to you already, this vaccine, and nobody wants to give something up that belongs to them. There's research on something called the Endowment Effect showing we overvalue our possessions and we really don't want to give them up relative to other things out in the world that we could obtain. And another reason is that it suggests it's recommended by either your pharmacist or your doctor. Why would they reserve it for you if they weren't recommending it? Also seems like it's going to be hassle-free, right? This thing's set aside. So all of those reasons are probably contributing, though we can't be sure, because the thing we know for sure is in each site, in urban and rural medical settings where your doctor is going to offer you a vaccine and you're coming in 3 days and you get this message, it increases take up. And in Walmart pharmacies where your pharmacist sends you this message and you have to, get in your car or drive to the pharmacy and ask for the vaccine, it increases take up better than anything else we tested. So that got rolled out in part because of it. I think it'll be helpful with booster shots as well to use that communication strategy. But that is not going to solve sort of anti-vaxxer sentiment, right? It's not that it's completely convincing someone who is strongly opposed. It's rather a slight twist on the way we've been communicating about this already that seems to be able to lift vaccination intentions, because subtle things, subtle details matter in our assessment of whether or not this is recommended, our assessment of whether it's going to be easy, and our valuation of what's being offered to us. So that's my best answer there. Although there's also, at this point, I think a lot to be done in terms of sort of the door-to-door, face-to-face motivational interviewing. And I am a big fan of mandates because one, they work really well. They, change the calculus so much that people make decisions that are good for the community. But they're not, I don't think they're too coercive in a case like this because of the lives that are on the line. And you can choose not to do it. You can get religious exemptions in some cases, or you can move to another new job, and the job market's really good right now. But I'm a big fan of mandates. They're doing more good than anything else that we're seeing. Okay, so that's vaccination.
Well, so, no. Listen, this is an issue right now. This is a worldwide issue, and it's, as you well know, this is a lion's den conversation because it goes in so many different directions, and there's so many. So it's interesting because what I'm seeing is, and we don't need to get into a whole COVID thing, but from a behavioral standpoint, it is interesting to me when I see people who are vaccinated and who are rallying against the mandates of vaccination, and they're saying, hey, look, like, I did it, but I don't want you telling me what to do. How would you, if you were tasked with something like that, to change either an anti-vaxxer's mind or somebody who says, just don't tell me what to do, is there anything that can facilitate a change for somebody that falls into camps like that? Or does the subject have to be somewhat willing?
I think you can change minds even when they're pretty hard line. I mean, it always depends on how hard line, right? How strongly held are these views? But I certainly think there are people right now who haven't gotten vaccinated in the United States who could potentially be convinced to get vaccinated. I think survey data from before times, when I was first working on this back in fall 2020, suggested that maybe 10% of the population was hardline anti-vaxxer, and we are not anywhere close to 90% vaccinated. Of course, there's kids who aren't eligible yet and so on. Also, you can see it if you look at age groups, right? There's not such a huge difference in anti-vax sentiment across age spectrums, but if you look at the oldest and most vulnerable, they're far more vaccinated than other age groups. So that means there's a cost benefit analysis going on here to some degree, right? The fact that like 18-year-olds are vaccinated at a lower rate, they're thinking it's part of it is they're not thinking they're as at risk. And that means you could convince them they're not necessarily completely against it. The best conversations about this are conversations that are non-judgmental, where you actually are asking people. There's a strategy called motivational interviewing that seems to be effective, where you're really asking people to dialogue with you about what's their thought process, why are they hesitant, how can I answer your questions, but tell me more about your line of thinking, as opposed to I'm going to jam my information down your throat. So I do think it's really important not to be in sort of sales mode when you're having a conversation with somebody, but rather really listen. What are they really worried about? And do you have any ability to alleviate that? But make sure it's a dialogue and it's a two-way street. And I think that will help a lot.
Is this area super interesting for you in terms of, you happen to be in the line of work that makes change happen, and we happen to be in the midst of a pandemic? Was there a part of you that, the professor part of you, looking at this as one big, experiment and watching how this is going down, and if yes, what have you learned just personally looking around and seeing who's wearing the mask, who's not wearing the mask, and how people are, what the conversations look like? Like, this must be really interesting for you.
Yeah, interesting is a word that doesn't have enough of a negative connotation, but I certainly feel like we've learned a lot. I have felt personally that I needed to help with what was going on, and there were a lot of nights when I stayed up really late working on projects because I hoped there was some good that could be done. And it was
Yeah.
exhausting. Just, I wish there had been a more organized, centralized approach to the behavioral science that needed to be done. And instead, it felt like just a ragtag group who realized we needed to raise our hands and help and chip in. And I hope before the next pandemic, there's more preparation, not only in thinking about how can we make vaccines and scale up delivery, but also understanding the behavioral science we need to know in order to get a response rate. That seems to be left out of the equation and planning for a pandemic, and it shouldn't have been. And it shouldn't have come down to, just some random people who sort of jumped into from the university side to do our best to help. Okay, in terms of what I've learned, other than that I was frustrated by that, one of the most interesting things I've learned is not actually about mask wearing and vaccination, though I think we learned a lot from the studies we did there too. But I've been really fascinated by the experience we all had when we rapidly transitioned from one way of life to another. And whether you were pro mask wearing or not, right? Huge numbers of Americans, regardless of your views on all of this, your office went remote, your life changed, your kids' school shut down, your life changed. We all faced new challenges that we weren't expecting and had to learn to live and work in different ways. And to me, one of the things that's been most fascinating is understanding, what did we learn in that pivot that could make work and life better after the pandemic. And I've been worrying a bit about, to what extent will people, when it does feel safe to be fully reopened, to what extent will they just fall right back